I feel like our opportunity is to show that it's not bad, it's good, it's feedstock. Because what's going to drive capitalism into waste management is making sure that that material is what it's supposed to be. So now you can create futures and sell against it, and that will drive capitalism into space.
Hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage? One of the most important challenges for us to solve is to be able to find the right structure for long shelf life food products. Kelly Williams, the co-founder of GreenKey Group and an independent consultant, has been on the forefront of that effort. He's had a long association and understanding for the substrate from a variety of angles. In his words, I spent the first third of my career creating the problem, middle third observing, and now I'm trying to fix it. We discuss a variety of solutions and ideas through this conversation, and it will be enriching for anyone digging in the packaging space. Enjoy. Hello. I'm so happy today to have Kelly Williams, the co-founder of GreenKey Group. But Kelly, you wear so many hats. So of course, we are going to go through those. And as we were discussing before hitting record, that there are so many intersections in our lives that this is going to be a really fun conversation. So thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Let's start with growing up. What were your early influences and, especially those that have impacted your life trajectory and as you see it now?
It's fun the older you get, right, to look back at those years and what was it about you, what drove your curiosity, what excited you, because in life you get to that point where you have to separate what is it about those days you can't go to sleep versus the days you can't wait to go to bed, and that's from your childhood, right? So I grew up on a farm, flipping rocks, looking for arrowheads and creeks. So my fascination with how things worked was almost from day one. So I grew up on a farm, a big family in a small town, never went on vacation. That was our life. And I think that had a lasting impact on my love for earth science.
Was it in Ohio?
Oh, it was in Ohio, yeah. So I grew up in southwestern Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio. So we claimed Cincinnati as our city because it was the closest one we could drive to was Cincinnati.
Yeah, and my wife grew up in West Virginia, not so far from you. So I visit there very often, and I know it's just the land is so beautiful in that area, and it's just stunning to be in that space. But what took you to chemical engineering? Growing on a farm and then choosing to do something that is a little different from farming.
I had no idea what to do, but I excelled in sciences and math. So I had a friend say, you should go be an engineer. That's what I'm going to do. I'm like, okay, let's do that. So at the time, one of the new engineering fields was environmental engineering. And there was a lot of talk about it and the role. I'm like, it just resonated with me because growing up on a farm, understanding nature seemed like a good fit for me. So I applied, got in, started that year and realized that environmental engineering, you don't even know what that means until your senior year. Up until then, you're designing bridges and buildings. And I'm like, I am not the person to be doing that. So I had a panic actually of what to do. And at that time, my chemistry in high school was the athletic director. He was gone most of the time. So my first chemistry class was tough. And the midterm was so hard that I joked with my friends that if I get a C on this test, that I will run naked through campus. And I got a 55%, which was an A. And my love of chemistry.
So you didn't do that. You didn't do that streak across the campus then. I thought the story was going there.
Well, they tried to get me to, but I corrected them. I said, if I got a C, I got an A. So I switched to chemical engineering and never looked back.
What was your dream growing up? I presume you never thought of yourself as a chemical engineer. Did you think of farming at any point, that you'll be a farm boy, or was it something else?
Never. I had no agenda, no destination, just a never ending obsession with the curiosity of how things work.
Wow, that's amazing. I think that's a great place to start, right? If you just have that curiosity, everything else start lining up. And then, of course, right from university, you have a string of things that you do with chemicals and with Equistar, Ashland. Talk to us a little bit more about that chemical journey before we switch to the packaging journey.
So I did not want to stay in Ohio. I wanted to get out of Ohio in the biggest, baddest way. Never left, never stepped foot in saltwater. I wanted out. But I also knew I was paying for school myself. So when you start looking around, you get these acceptance letters and you look at it and you look at your parents, you say, that's per year. So I couldn't afford it. So somebody else that I knew in my social bonded community that if I'm going into engineering, I should go to the University of Cincinnati because they have this thing called a co-op program that they kind of invented in the 50s. So it was a quarter system. So I knew going in, I'm going to go to work and school for a 5-year program versus a 4-year no work. So when it came time to find a co-op job, that's when I got the hell out of Ohio. And I went to Baton Rouge, Louisiana for what then was called Paxson Polymer Company. It was a joint venture between Allied Signal and Exxon. And it was an interesting time in petrochemicals, we'll just put it that way. But even then, I started to see these presentations about growth and expansion. And I just kept thinking, not forever, right? You're not going to just keep cracking more ethylene forever. There's a point it levels off, right? And that's so because then I wasn't brave enough to break groupthink. I've now made a career out of breaking groupthink, but back then I didn't. So that always carried with me. So out of school, I ended up going to a polyethylene company called Quantum, or at the time it was Quantum Chemical, which became now what we know as LyondellBasell. So again, I just continued to see it. But I think the worth mentioning here for you to get context is I experienced the last major spigot event in fossil plastics. There have been events leading up to that, like metallization of films, creating this super over-engineered packaging. It was just becoming so efficient and so performance-based that we created, right, these Spanish Inquisition of R&D tests because we had to separate two over-engineered material suppliers. But what happened during that time was a realization that the Middle East is going to be producing gas and plastics at a rate and at a cost point that's concerning. So that's what kind of triggered the mega mergers. If you remember, Exxon and Mobil were separate companies. They came together. We were the first one. Quantum Chemical merged with Arco Chemical and Lyondell Petrochemicals, forming Equistar Chemicals. And then Chevron Phillips, BP Amoco, Exxon Mobil, that all happened in a fairly short period of time. And at that point, that little pellet of plastic, which used to be the pedestal material, and we would point over to that ethylene plant, like those guys have to do that so we can sell this. This became a non-flammable way to move gas by the billions of pounds. Reactors were being shut down in favor of reactors that were doing 120, 150,000 pounds an hour. It's a major event. So I left the industry because I didn't know it at the time, but I wasn't comfortable there. And then I spent a few years outside of it working on modifying properties of materials, and then got called back to packaging at just the right time. And then, like I say, I spent the first third of my career creating the problem, the middle third observing it, and now I'm trying to fix it.
Love it. As you were speaking, I was reminded of this wonderful spiritual guru in India who says, in order to really know something, you have to go through it, right? So, exactly what you said, you kind of, in a way, your understanding is so much deeper of the complexities that even the petroleum polymer world carries, that for you to transgress it is probably easier than somebody else, or to even take the learnings from that. And let me stay with that theme. So, thinking about the positives, what were the learnings that came from that part that actually serve you today? Really knowing the petroleum polymer, and like you said, it's sometimes over engineered, but there is a performance side that comes with it. So, were there things that you carry now that have been embedded in your mind and maybe subconsciously as well that actually keep you in good stead?
Boy, that's a double barrel answer to a great question. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that that was a turning point for me in my entire life. My foundation had created a fissure, and I filled it one day mowing my lawn in June of 2001. And the reason I carried a pencil and paper during mowing my yard is because this was not the first time. I kept coming to this position of clarity, but I couldn't always remember the steps that got me there. So I started plotting the steps that kept, and I wrote those words that day, the ultimate human dilemma. And everything changed for me. So I'm about to publish a book called Tiny Hands, the Soft Power Model, which is tied to that. So yeah, that industry absolutely changed my perspective. I just didn't realize that I left it necessarily for other resonating energy-based reasons.
Yeah. So the idea that in order to really understand, there is a lot of good things that come out of that petroleum polymer, and you, of course, understand it deeply. So what are the positives that stay in your mind and maybe in your subconscious mind that enable you to develop even a better solution or to understand that industry?
So that's the first barrel, that personal journey piece of being in the plastics industry, and what I took from it is still living to this day. Some of it baked for 23 years before it came to surface. But the other part of it, I think, is that I can now finish that equation because of the amount of time I've spent in natural material sciences, is that hydrocarbons became headache medicine for trying to valorize at scale the inherent heterogeneity of natural materials. Because we can stick it in the fire and hit it with a caveman stone and create all of these molecules and polymers. So it became at first like the EMT on the scene for packaging to keep up with food overproduction, to now it's like a chemical dependence on it. So what I've realized is, what are hydrocarbons? They're the leaves and the cellulose and the trees and the plants, just pressurized and cooked for a millennia to where there's no hydrophilicity left. They reject water completely. So we're building beautiful molecules that do whatever we want, but we failed to realize that we're taking skeletal dead carbon and entropically dispersing it into living carbon, and we expect anything other than an entropic complexity with that, an irreversible complexity by doing that. So ocean plastics were the plastics we could see. The microplastics are now the danger that we can't see. So the learning now is what we learned from hydrocarbons can now be applied to natural materials. Why? Because you know how you can get a mouse swab and find a relative? That's called polymerase chain reaction. That's an enzyme-based process that the guy who invented it knew how to do it for 11 years. Struggled with, how do I get an enzyme stable at 130 degrees Celsius to replicate DNA? He found it one day. The story I was told in college was he was high on acid in the redwoods of California when it came to him, but I speculate. But he found it in the hot springs. And that's changed everything, right? Here's the difference. We have almost godlike ability to not have to go flipping rocks in Arkansas or digging mud in Africa to find enzymes. If you have something that's even close, you can force the evolution to do these things. And it's everywhere. It's in every laundry detergent that you use, has engineered enzymes in it. So we're seeing it in all these different pockets, even in food science, where food science at first was growing food without problem. Now it's building nutrition back into them. Why hasn't it reached material science for packaging? There's a reason. There's nothing to do it on. 93% of the world's paper comes from the craft process, which is what? It is a fossil industry approach to natural materials. We stick the trees in the fire and we beat it with the same caveman stone. So that cellulose is cellulose, but it's hornified. It's calcified. Microorganisms will eat it, but it's the deer legs at the wolf park. They don't like it. It's the pretzels in the Chex Mix. They'll eat it, but they don't prefer it because it's not a live cellulose anymore. So I think that's the biggest takeaway from the fossil plastics industry is what do we get right? What do we learn from it? Which is we need a simple feedstock that we can valorize simply to meet societal needs. And look, we're addicted to convenience. And 8 billion people can't become overnight homesteaders. So packaged food is essential to survival. We just got to increase the nutritional content and reduce the entropy of it afterward.
Oh my gosh, you've given me so much to unpack there, Kelly. So anyways, I was with some remarkable people this week, and one of the things I was questioning this amazing woman who's been on my show. She's called Sean Sutherland, and she runs something called the Plastic Planet. A really amazing person, and I was asking her, nothing on Earth exists without a reason. So even all the petroleum, the crude oil that is under the surface is there for a reason. So I was asking her, does she understand by our extraction what is really happening under the surface? And she said she doesn't, but she'll introduce me to somebody who does. And I think it's also that invisibility. So I'm adding another layer to the complexity, right?
So,
This may be the veins, the blood flow inside the Earth's veins, and we may even be extracting a lot of that. And how that is going to impact is going to be another layer of challenges that might come. So I don't know. I'm kind of posing it to you as a question in case you know that, because that's the other challenge, right? We are going on extracting something that has, like you said, been created over the millennia, and we don't know how we are impacting the undersurface of the Earth. So do you have ideas there?
I've never thought about the underbody of the Earth so much, other than if you think about what is that process, that fossilization process. It's all about sugar. We'll go there in a minute, but you start with that little sugar unit, then you create a higher molecular weight, becomes a carbohydrate. You keep increasing the molecular weight, you get cellulose. So when you're in that high, intense pressure, intense heat, almost like you can think of you when you're in those personal situations, right? You start to densify, you start to close off around you, you start to get tighter within your cells. Same process. What happens? Anything that loves other stuff like oxygen goes. You end up with just carbon and hydrogen, which is 100% fully rejective of water. And water doesn't create life. Life creates water. Water is the essential. That's the tiny hands in my book. Those little hydrogens at a triangular shape to that oxygen is what allows cellulose, lignin, and hemicellulose to grow plants and trees. It's what allows our DNA to hold together for an enzyme to open it up, to read it, bring it back together. Enzymes work within that space of soft bonding. The reason we use the Craft process to get cellulose is because in 1 gram of cellulose, there's 10 to the 21 hydrogen bonds. That's a billion trillion bonds. But I can peel them apart because it's the weakest force in nature. But we're not peeling it apart. We're hitting it. We're beating it caveman style to get it apart. So I feel like it's not about what happens inside the Earth. It's about trying to remember what life is. And it's the role water plays in it. So enzymes haven't evolved to take over this completely water rejective material. That's not part of what they were evolved to do. So I think any type of recirculation from inside the Earth to the outside of the Earth is messing with domains it shouldn't be messed with.
When I look at all the production processes in the ecology, it is all additive manufacturing, right? If you look at a cellulose creation, the big trees, even the redwood trees, all they are doing is sequestering carbon using that one source of energy that shines up there, and some minerals from underneath, and voila, you get beautiful cellulose fibers. And exactly what you are saying, and we'll get there, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it. And what we do is, of course, subtractive. We take that cellulose and we grind it and remove the lignin through very, very, nasty chemistry, and then we rehydrolyze it to bond together, which is such a regressive way, in a way, to do things. So I wish in the future we will get into additive manufacturing, where you have machines that are maybe sequestering carbon and creating cellulose rather than crushing cellulose. But yeah, we'll jump more into it. But I know this is getting deeper than I had expected to, and probably I'd expected that this might happen.
Yeah.
But I want to make it a little lighter, because there are things that I read which were very interesting, and I'm still going to keep with your polyethylene world. What is machine direction oriented HMWPE films that you worked on? Is this,
Oh,
because I always thought machine direction is more paper. I didn't know. I thought the polyethylenes were more square in their structure.
it was something I got involved in right out of college was MDO. So when we formed the mega merger, Lyondell Petrochemicals, the technical people moved to Cincinnati, the business people moved from Cincinnati to Houston. So there was a separation. So these new guys coming in from Texas, we're talking about MDO. It was actually James River started playing around with it, got acquired by Print Pack. Some people stayed or left, and so there's some incubated, like little innovation pockets trying to do it. Well, my group, a friend of mine at Equistar, we decided, we were asked, do you guys want to see what you can do with this? So we said, yeah. What we discovered is that like your grocery store bags, those thin bags, that's called it's high molecular weight polyethylene, which is bimodal. And when you orient those to really high degrees in the machine direction, generally what happens is films get really splitty. We started to see it go back up. So we were making stronger films through orientation. Then we started building upon that in terms of densities and co-extrusions. And they're like, well, why blow film? You can sheet extrude into an MDO and create a lot of surface area in a fast. So we were pioneering something new, and it did grab traction, and it's in the market today. But now if you buy a 5 or 7 layer blown film line, I think most of them come standard with inline MDO. So it's funny because back then we never thought of MDO as being the recyclability solution, but that's where we find it today. Is that's how you make an all polyethylene bag or pouch, is to use an oriented polyethylene outside film.
Got it. Thank you for that. Also, you kind of move from a process side to a marketing side. And was that transition that you wanted to do, to get more on the business side and not stay with the science side? Or is that something that just happened, just that fate wanted you to go in that direction?
I think fate didn't drive me in the direction of business. It absolutely drove me in the direction of new business development. And what does that really mean? It means seeing what nobody else sees. And that's been somewhat of a knack of mine my entire life. So I've always fit into seeing what everyone else is missing, but now brave enough to break the groupthink around it.
And then, of course, slowly you move into flexible packaging. There is where I want to dig deeper. And tell me more about that movement and what was HP Indigo doing. And of course, I would love for you to address the challenges with flexible packaging along with that.
Oh boy, that's near and dear to my heart. So it really started to piece together when I was at Ashland Chemical, which was a combination of pressure sensitive adhesives. So they sell to the label stock manufacturers. They had laminating adhesives and coatings through acquisition. And they had a portfolio of what I would call specialty coatings. These are the people that nobody knows about that have like a two pass inline aqueous coater. They do that specialty stuff. And then I always knew short run packaging as defined by this piece of equipment called a Comco ProGlide. Comco bought them in 2008, 2009, right at the beginning of the global recession. So they bought them because they had brought inline flexo into flexible packaging in a very demonstrable way, because there were like 8 or 9 companies in North America that had it, that were kicking butt, servicing these small brands and this increasing demand for SKUs, right? Digital comes along, and I had been following digital for a while. So the relationship with HP actually started through the primer technology, but then we started. So anyway, they convinced me to come work for them to help bring digital print to market. And it just reinforced what I'd already been putting together, is that the way we make packaging is old code. It's flawed. It's outdated. Because if you think of packaging, it's always buried print. I don't know how familiar you are, but you take like a really thin layer of polyester, You print it in reverse image and then you glue it to everything else. So you can't get to the ink. You would have to scratch through a plastic layer of film to get to it. Nobody wanted to build it that way, but at the time you couldn't make sure that that ink won't come off in a person's sweaty fingers or that it wouldn't rub against each other. There was no coatings that performed well enough to ensure the travel to an RDC and then to a retail shelf. So that was a simple solution. It made sense. Just bury it behind a windshield. And I had an engineer at Kraft back in like 2006, 2005, waiting for other people to show up because I was talking to him about MDO. Told me that what we have done, we're never going to be able to turn it back. And what he meant was, we're driving triplex laminations where you start with print and then glue all these things together. And that there's so much energy towards it that when we realized that, because I was saying like I can give you an oriented film that you can surface print. He was saying it's the horse is out of the stable, like it's too late. And boy, I really think he was right, because we're still seeing that reinforcing an old way to do it. Because if you think about packaging, when it goes on the machine that's printed and puts product in it, it's a narrow web world. So we don't design for packaging. We design for printing presses, because back then single brand SKUs could drive that. And I feel like, and also in 2012, 17 converters had about 60% of the market in North America. Today, it may be less than 10, have over 80%. So they're all trying to find spots on sinking boats of these long-running, continuously predictable legacy SKUs are going to continue to wane down because there's 25,000 emerging brands in the United States alone, being serviced by who? 10 converters their order isn't big enough for them to take it. That's why probably half of the $5.4 billion stand-up pouch market's being serviced from Asia, because they're able to provide that need, that typical need.
So I'm going to take a step back. I realize that a lot of what you're speaking over time I've learned, but a lot of the listeners will not know the stuff that you're talking about. So we're going to take it a notch lower and talk a little bit more about flexible packaging itself. What is flexible packaging? Why are the layers needed? And of course, the conversion process that is, again, like you said, the tollers need, there is its own complexity of conversion itself. And how did the flexible packaging side emerge in terms of barriers and stuff like that? And you were talking earlier about food. So I'm going to, again, simplify the question. Tell us about flexible packaging. Why is it needed? How did it emerge? And what is the complexity?
Flexible packaging started with cellophane and glassine coated paper. If you wanted to package something and have it last on a shelf, that was what changed it. The grocery store emerged because of cellophane, because it had this amazing oxygen barrier, so it could keep things fresh. And the world was built. Frito-Lay chip bags were based on cellophane until like the late 70s. Polypropylene replaced all of that. So you kind of went from moisture was our sensitivity to moisture is impenetrable because fossil plastics don't like water. Oxygen became the problem. Well, since then, we've got co-extruded films with different polymers in it. We've got metallization. So we have multiple ways to add oxygen barrier to that. So it's funny because as we see compostable materials being engineered over into those, reclaiming those lost areas, it's kind of back to, we don't need oxygen, we need moisture, because natural materials have really good oxygen barrier. Why? Because there's oxygen in the molecules. It's a different system. So I always found that an interesting difference. But what's happened over time is we just optimized flexible packaging to this incredible point of efficiency, of cost, of barrier, super over-engineered barrier performance. So that's great and all, but now you have to do something with it. Either recyclable, PCR, I think all you're doing is giving it one more pass through the system. So even if they realize that they got to start working on compostable, it's tough because no one has the assets to do that type of work anymore. You don't need it in an optimized world. So just access to application development assets has been one of the challenges, I think, with bringing new sustainable material systems to market.
And if you look at a typical flexible packaging that is ubiquitous, something like maybe a snack bag, like you mentioned, Frito-Lay's, how many layers is it? And what are the typical layers that are needed in order to have like that 2-year shelf life or something like that? You know, you eat a potato chip and it's as fresh and it was made a year back, and that's basically because of the packaging. So what is the layering and what is the complexity in layering in the conversion process?
It's the ABCs of packaging. So that A layer, the outside layers, the appearance layer, that's where the ink goes. Like I said, it's usually always buried behind the film, not printed on the surface of the film. So it's a sacrificial layer to carry ink. The next is usually where the barrier comes in. So metallization, barrier coatings, that's where you're engineering. Sometimes it'll be in the C layer, but the C layer is containment. That's the part that seals the bag together. But you're seeing lots of combinations where now the A layer is being barrier modified, the C layer is being barrier modified. But if you think about it just generally, it's the ABC. So 3 layers is general. It's very typical.
And why does it become so challenging to downcycle? Well, I won't call it recycle because recycle is a misnomer. But talk to us a little more about why it becomes so challenging that it has no economic value and nobody wants it.
A couple of ways for that. Besides the entropy of it, just the fact that when you disperse it, getting it back, we don't even design packaging to stay in one piece. When we open packaging, a lot of times it ends up in 2 pieces of litter that we now have to manage, entropically manage. So if you could take a chip bag and turn it back into another chip bag, which you can't because the food safety concerns alone would prohibit. Let's say you could. Let's say somehow somebody figures all that out. It's not quite like PCR. It's not one and done. You get 3-4 tries at it because you can't continue to put that into an extruder, melt it, push it, and form it. It'll start breaking down. And pretty soon it's going to gum up your equipment. So it's not, the only thing that's infinitely recyclable is aluminum and glass. So it's not recyclable. It's repurposable, but the problem is MRFs aren't set up for it. If they don't filter it out, it goes in with the cardboard because that's where it would travel through. So there is no way to really isolate it. And even if they did, again, it has limited utility, which is why if it goes anywhere, it goes into what? Park benches and dog frisbees. It's going into something that's not even meant for circularity. It's meant for shoveling it forward in somebody else's supply chain.
And what about the complexities within those structures? What I'm also told is that when you even look at a simple polyethylene, it's not. It's got certain chemicals that are embedded. Even when you if you were to use a single layer of polyethylene and kind of downcycle it, even in that, there is a leaching that happens of certain chemicals. And then another thing you talked about a little bit, and I would love for you to educate us, is the inks itself. The inks are typically not made from natural materials. So that also probably has a complexity when you're downcycling something. So how do those 2 things play in the product?
So let's address the food contact chemicals. So that is a very real thing. I don't want to quote specifically, but it's something a brand friend of mine gave to me. It's about a study of the 14,000 and change known food contact chemicals that come from plastics. And that 25% of them were found either in tissue, blood, urine, like it was that type of study. So they're out there. We know they're out there. And it's a problem. But if you know you need to design a clean polyethylene, some of those antioxidants that we now realize are one of those FCCs, I feel like even if you designed it to be cleaner, it's still going to be problematic to do all the things that we need it to do in terms of barrier, sealing, how it runs on machinery. There's a certain thickness that these machines, so yes, man made these machines, man created this problem, but we're at such a large scale, you have to really plan for decades of evolutionary change to start going from current equipment to equipment designed with new material science in mind. So I think that is one of the challenges PE has. But until you start shrinking circularity down to manageable radiuses, recycling will never work if it doesn't design for escape. which is why earth digestible material science does. But if you could create cellular networks where you can control that within a range, then it's doable. But I don't think you can ever we'll never hit 90%.
Yeah, and also, even if we call it recyclable, there has to be an out, right? With the petroleum polymer, my challenge is that I never see, ultimately it'll become like a polyester and lie in Atacama Desert catching fire, or something like that. And then, of course, we have one ozone layer, thankfully, and it's not getting out of there. So it's coming down as acid rain or whatever in the end, or creating carbon in the air and getting into those challenges. So there's never really an out, at least what I find with cellulosic substances, that eventually, if they're not multi-layered and not laminated or anything, eventually if they get out of the stream, they'll at least disintegrate, or they will not cause harm to another being on the planet. So at least I see that difference. The one more thing which I would love to learn from you is the complexity of inks itself. How dangerous are the inks that are typically used? And yes, you said there's a protective layer, so they ain't getting out. But then at some point they will get exposed to different things on this planet, and how does that impact?
That is a really good question, because inks is one that I think, for me, I don't put a lot of material science thought into it, because it really represents, I think, very easy space to develop new organic binders. Like, I feel like that's not what's holding it up. What's holding it up is these massive scale operations that just can't swap in and out of ink sets like that. So where you are seeing compostable inks being used would be like, paper plates, things that are that type of, so they're there. I feel like this is where the regulations may have to get tighter. Someone's going to have to maybe drive it. So I feel like they're more there than most people realize. They're just not being used because right now they don't have to from a certification perspective, and it's a real headache to do. So I don't know how that plays out, but I think that's one of them.
The Good Garbage podcast has been brought to you by PHA. PHA has been creating solutions in the food packaging, carry, and service space. PHA utilizes sugarcane residue and upcycles it into amazing products. Their latest offering is a compostable, flexible packaging solution for the chocolate and confectionery industry. The products are available in the Indian subcontinent and in North America now. PHA is also building an end-to-end solutions for customers in the food service and delivery space. For any query, do email at connect@paka.com, and PAKA is PAKKA. Now, back to the show.
Let's journey on. And I see that that lawn mowing movement definitely led to other ideas. And I see that you become a sustainability strategist at Futurama, and then NatureFlex is what you start using. So tell us about that journey and that evolution from the lawn mowing to becoming the person that you eventually evolved into, and so clear about working with the space of transformation.
Working for Futamura in cellophane was an absolute rock that stepped me to where I'm at, where what I was in that day mowing my lawn, the ultimate human dilemma, has had a few key points of breakthrough, including my startup GreenKey, which we can cover if you like. But to what led to the book, Tiny Hands, the Soft Power Model, is about hydrogen bonding. Because I don't know if your audience knows what nanocellulose is, but I'll just tell you, it is cellulose that is so separated from its cell that the surface area is that if I gave you a jar of it and I said that's 3% solid, you turn it over and say, no, it's a solid mass. Like, no, that's how much water it's holding, right? But the thing with nanocellulose, anybody in the technical field would say that I'm perfectly right, mostly right, or fair to say what I'm about to say. You can make anything out of it, literally anything out of nanocellulose. So if you ever had any question whether or not it has real utility in the market, that's what cellophane is. Cellophane is nanocellulose, controlling the hornification of nanocellulose is how they create something that looks like plastic film, as clear as glass, and is 100% cellulose. So I think that's directionally where we're going to see material science. I think there's 2 P's of packaging: paper, non-forestry, and PLA, polylactic acid. It's been around, it's proven ubiquity. But the reason I love it, if you bear with me for a moment, the reason PLA should be on everybody's radar is because there's a lot of movement. There's what's called the paperization of packaging. So a lot of brands are moving towards paper packaging just because it feels right, or that there's a chance it can pass curbside recyclability. But they're taking their carbon footprint from something that's a lot lower, even though it's got the detriment in the environment, and they're making it worse because they're bulking it up with paper, where I feel like what we should be rethinking is carbon footprint. We can't be ignoring carbon footprint for the sake of end of life, whether it's recycling or composting, because if you do that, things like greener sources of cellulose change the game, which my startup GreenKey, that's what it is. It's biomass fractionation that doesn't use temperature, but PLA too. So nature ferments food waste to the same lactic acid that we're making polylactic acid with. The only reason we're not making lactic acid from food waste is fear of the feedstock. But if you start thinking about lactic acid, boy, you talk about a really cool circularity in the system. When we work out and our muscles get sore, that's glucose turning into lactic acid, which does what? Goes to our liver, gets turned back into glucose. That's pretty cool. Lactic acid regulates things in our guts, in the soil gut, or the soil health. We preserve food with lactic acid. So why not temporarily protect that preserved food with the polymer version of it? And it's the most recyclable polymer there is, because I can put it in an Instant Pot and turn it right back into lactic acid. So it's like, but we don't use it because it's scary to a fossil industry that's announcing one of the largest polyethylene plants in the world that's going to break ground in Texas. So there's a lot of concern about the truth around PLA, in my opinion.
A lot of my friends are going to be very happy that you talked about the positives of PLA, because we hear a lot of things around PLA similar to what you said in terms of food source, and they also talk about the industrial composting instead of home composting, and also there not being real recycling ability yet of PLA. But I know I have a very dear friend who's setting up a 75,000 ton capacity in India right now, and they're really working hard towards making it. And thankfully, they are actually doing it from their waste streams from their sugar manufacturing. So it doesn't affect their sugar manufacturing. They take the molasses, and then, instead of ethanol, they go towards lactic acid. So in a way, it's not affecting a food source at all. It might affect, they might produce lesser alcohol, which is also a good thing, overall. So that's great to know. But I want to learn more from you about this idea of PLA, and I want to go towards the properties. And of course, there are challenges in terms of malleability. There are challenges in terms of, again, moisture barrier. So how do you see that evolving? Because obviously it's very early days still, and there is lots to be done. But would love to hear your thoughts on that.
If you could take regional biomass, agricultural residues, hemp grown on purpose, grass clippings collected, if you can separate that into its bits and pieces and take that cellulose towards nanocellulose in terms of degree of fibrillization, because we're not putting it in a fire and beating it with the caveman stone. If you have that and you understand how simple PLA actually is, it's ring opening polymerization, chapter 1 of the polymer handbook, you can start seeing them as chassis, not as single materials. So I'll give you an example. If you took PLA versus homopolymer polypropylene versus linear low density polyethylene and went down the following list, PLA checks all those boxes. The other two do not. I can blow it. I can cast it. I can biaxially orient it. I can metallize it. It's got see-through clarity. It's heat sealable. It's stiff. What am I missing? Oh, it's
I can add one more.
yeah, please.
We've been foaming it, and it foams. It can create like a styrene
Yes,
replacement,
yes, that's a
polystyrene.
great one. And also you can emulsify it into a coating. You can't do those things. So it has absolutely the right to ubiquity. And what most people don't realize is we have to design. So my predecessor company, my first job out of school was working on the first unit that invented maleic anhydride grafting to make tie layers. You don't know what that is. That's where you take polyethylene and create something really special on it. And then that's what allows you to make these co-extruded films that are sustainability nightmares, but give you beef jerky that'll last 5 years in your cupboard. You don't have to do that with biopolymers. They like each other because there's oxygen in their backbones. They haven't been dehydrated to a corpse. They actually will behave with each other. So you can, in a lot of ways, simplify packaging. And we see routinely that a compostable structure that works is sometimes up to 40-45% thinner than its fossil counterpart.
So again, the other debate that is happening, and maybe it's not a debate, it's coexistence, but how do you see the whole PHA stream? PHA, I'm not even going to say PHA versus PLA, but PHA and PLA. And how do you see both of those?
I'm just going to be brutally honest with that question, because I've been asked, why isn't PHA? Like, why am I saying the 3 Ps of packaging? I like PHA. It's an unlimited toolkit to design polymer science. Here's the problem I have with PHA. It involves genetics, dietary restrictions. It's versus ring opening polymerization of PLA. I cannot compare those in the same context, but it can be manufactured, distributed. And for that, it deserves high potential, high investment, because that if you see what you can do with amorphous PHA put into PLA, it's extraordinary transformation of that polymer. So I think it's a toolkit, a massive toolkit to modify the properties of plastics versus building something in and of itself out of PHA. That's my opinion.
And also feedstock, at least the people I've talked to at scale, of course, what is scaling is mostly things like vegetable oil based, but I had lovely conversations with people doing it out of methane, and that becomes very easy. And like you said, it can be very easily distributed. You can set up a 10,000 ton facility and it might still be commercially viable. Whereas PLA, you typically want it to be a seriously strong, big, Corbion or NatureWorks or, one of these biggies who can set it up. So that is another benefit that I see. I'm going to, again, continuing my education, and I'm sure those of the listeners, what do you think about the petroleum-based polymers that can disintegrate, supposedly, PBA, PBOH, PBS? How do you grade those, and what are the benefits and or the challenges that come with those?
So I draw the distinction with, which is why I think ASTM D6400 continues to be a great test for, but not for what people think of it. I look at it as a demonstration of earth digestibility. Either the microorganisms digest it or they don't. So I don't distinguish those that are using synthetic building blocks to do that, because I know bio-PBS could be made from all natural feedstocks, but if the supply chain isn't there for them to do it, that's not their fault. So I don't distinguish the source of it today. I worry about, does it do what it's designed to do? Does nature take it back?
So what you're saying is a PBA or a PBS will not be digested by a natural bacteria?
No, they absolutely are.
They are digested.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so that way they are. If we ignore the feed stock and coming from petroleum, you feel that those polymers are okay. But the other challenge I've heard, and this is again hearsay, I don't have technical know-how of this, is that there are challenges that come with recyclability and clumping when you look at a PBA coated, say even a paper. There is challenges that happen, and of course they're also talking now about challenges that might happen in terms of food contact. So I don't know if you have more ideas around that and would like to throw some light on that.
I haven't heard anything on the food contact side of biopolymers, but if you're talking about recyclability or repulpability, I'll give you an insight into one of the challenges of it. And it goes back to what I was saying before. What is a hydrocarbon? Hydrocarbon has been a soul extracted from its former self that no longer accepts hydration. It's completely hydrophobic. So when you're putting a hydrocarbon polymer onto a repulpable paperboard, it's easy peasy because it's easy to get it away. When you start using natural materials, they don't mind water and they'll tend to agglomerate. So what we call stickies is actually not a polymer science problem. It's just we're now working with living materials versus, cadavers of the past in our design. But what I'm seeing is really good work in understanding debonding as much as bonding. So I think it's all straightforward engineering stuff.
You call it straightforward, and my mind has 1,000 things going on in it, all the.
And I may be oversimplifying it too, but in my mind, it's not.
Yeah. So I'm going to step away because this will keep taking us down one rabbit hole. But I want to go to GreenKey and tell us more about what instigated that idea. And you've kind of inferred to it a little bit, but I want us to dive deep into the challenges that you mentioned in terms of pulping, et cetera, et cetera. And how did that whole idea germinate, and why are you so passionate about it now?
When I got introduced to it, I was working with a group on something separate from, but with the same people. And I'll just make it quick. They kept hinting to this thing that I need to see, or this person I needed to meet. And when they described it as a green pulping process that doesn't use temperature and all natural chemicals, and they told me what it was based upon, which is, like if a log falls in the forest, nature takes it back slowly, but it takes it back. Same chemical mechanism we're talking about. I struggled with it. I went back 3 times over 6 months because I had to keep it so I've been with this now for a few years and in continuing to really understand the heart of what we do. And it goes back to some work that was done back in the early 90s is the genesis of the work when they were trying to find new ways to prepare cellulose for dissolving grade, where you want to get it really fibrillated, really clean. There were some learnings there that carry forward to what we have here. But what I'll tell you about it is that it knows how to get those hydrogen bonds to let go. It knows how to separate the matrix from the plant and start separating the fibrils to the point that 2 passes give dissolving grade. And we think that it's not far from, in fact, there's some grant funding now to pursue coatings based on the nanocellulose generation that you can get from it. So it's just one of those, and then it kind of pieces together, right? Understanding nanocellulose at Futamura, understanding this. So being forced to relearn a paper industry I had kind of mocked in my plastics days, to going back to my childhood from earth science to chemical engineering, why I took biochemical engineering as a focus my senior year and started to understand enzymatic systems. It's all been like just building upon this point of clarity that we can't make ourselves more sustainable by going into nature and finding a molecule that looks like our hydrocarbon molecule and hit it with the same caveman stone and the same caveman fire. That's not regenerative. That's substitution. And until we start looking at enzyme-guided valorization of natural materials, we're missing it altogether.
Yeah, that's what they say, right? There is only synchronicity in this universe, that everything happens for a reason. So, you going back to what you were learning in college and, the full circle of life. So one of the things that, and we've played with enzymes a decent amount. So one of the things we've noticed is the time factor, right? You're trying to produce something at scale with a certain tonnage every day. And enzymes do work. Giant panda consumes bamboo, and the wood beetle, delignifies the wood, and the white rot mushroom does that. And there's the whole range of things in nature that typically break down those bonds, as you say. But when we look at it as there's a time factor, And in industry, that becomes a challenge. So how are you countering that challenge, that you may not be able to create the kind of tanks that are needed in order to, have a reaction for 24 hours or something like that? So how do you see that evolving as you go along building this technology?
Two things to that point. The easiest one is, how do we increase the efficacy of its work? How do we help it work faster? Again, engineering the enzyme to do that, but we got to start thinking about the kinetic environments. We need to help it. We need to help it break that wood apart that it's going to do the magic on. So I feel like tying it to some sort of kinetic process is key. And I'm really glad you asked this question, because I really want to try to convey this as clearly as possible. We have already had the warning signs of this. I think the global recession in 2009, the pandemic, because of hydrocarbons and the fact that we treat trees, because hemp has twice as much cellulose as a tree does. But we use trees because we have created the centralized fossil industry approach to harvesting cellulose, just as we harvest hydrocarbons, which allowed us to build these enormously long supply lines. Think about paper. We make paper on large bodies of water because the solution to pollution has to be dilution. And it takes, 17,000 gallons to make a ton of pulp. And what do we do when we make it? We dry it to a bone, ship it to another continent, to re-water it, to make paper, to dry it again and ship it across more continents. It's insane that we even, that we're not noticing that.
What was that idiom you just used? Solution to pollution? No, solution to something else.
Solution to pollution is dilution.
Solution to pollution is?
Yep. Dilution.
I love it. That's going to stay with me for a long time.
I didn't coin it. I've read it other places, but it is true. But again, we take these things for granted. So we're fixing all the things that they're systemically connected to. We're chasing the solution to the entropy of the problem versus the problem itself. So
oh my gosh.
So the reason that's important is you said, how do we scale this? We have got to arrive now that scale is not another large centralized factory. It is, how do I create something that works, do Control C and Control V it in 40 or 50 other places. So now you're valorizing natural materials from the region that you're valorizing it from. The compost facility is going to become the footprint of the future bioeconomy, the bioalchemy, where you're turning biomass into fractionated bits and pieces. Pretty soon, the big chemical companies are going to start coming in because now they can start valorizing what they do best. So I feel like the future of industry is going to be compost facilities are going to start seeing them transform. And think about it. It's where it happens. Compost is where carbon regenerates. It's where food nutrition regenerates. It's not waste, it's renewal. Everything should start in renewal.
So you're taking me back to so many things that are deeply embedded in my heart that I'm going to actually use you literally as my shrink now. So I entered the paper industry kicking and screaming because my father wanted out. And thankfully, it was an industry that he had created which had many things which, quote unquote, were right. It made all the paper from sugarcane residue. It was off-grid, created all the energy from biomass. He had a lot of interest in making sure that the water was treated well. And then eventually we set up conventional chemical recovery. So we were at least using the harsh solvents, caustic soda, the alkalis of the world, to at least recover 95% of those. But you and I know the reality. It's still terrible, right? Mm-hmm. So I live with it every day. But I feel that, running away is not an option. So let's keep working on this. But exactly what you said, we've gotten our water consumption out, and I still use metrics, so forgive me for that. But say 110 meter cubes per ton to 30 meter cubes a ton. But it's still 30 meter cubes. That's a lot of water, 30,000 liters for a ton of paper.
Yeah.
We still use a lot of energy. Even if we make it off grid, so what? You're using 11 to 1200 units of kilowatt hour per ton of paper. You're using a lot of steam. That is again, heat, energy. And then, of course, as much as you try, you are going to take out water. That's not going to be the same quality as you took in. You've treated it, you've met all the pollution norms, but it's still got a certain biological oxygen demand and chemical oxygen demand, that's not ideal for marine life. So in the end, you are still kind of doing that, and in the process, I have always had a challenge with this idea that we are an eco-friendly industry, because it's an oxymoron, right? If you're an industry, you're not eco-friendly. Cannot be, because you're ultimately taking something away. So how do you see the future of this industry? What is your dream state that that you're working towards? How will, and I'm talking more from as much as you can share in the process side, that okay, you take in a cellulose from the environment, which hopefully is a waste, and then how do you do the processing so that you're not doing the kind of damage that we do today?
Boy, you're really unlocking a big piece of this. We could probably do an episode on it, but I'll tell you quickly how I see it. But I'm gonna start real quick with I think the signals are already there, like talking about annexing Canada, Greenland, Russia invading Ukraine. That BlackRock's saying it right now. Look, Bill Gates isn't the largest farm owner in the United States because he wants the freshest food for his house chef, right? It's about natural materials, water rights. I think PricewaterhouseCoopers said 55% of global GDP is tied to natural materials. BlackRock is sounding the alarm that this ignoring of it is going to come to roost. So there's this kind of, I wouldn't say they're taking the bolts out of the flange to hydrocarbons, but they're definitely loosening the bolts, and they're setting up hardware to figure out how to extract natural materials to do the same thing. Here's our opportunity. You can't centralize natural materials. You have, unless somebody becomes the McDonald's of material science, you have to do it where it's at. So my vision of the future is, again, those compost facilities become bioalchemy centers, biorefineries. But I feel like what GreenKey represents is the ability to do what we should be doing, making all packaging we can out of cellulosics, leveraging what nanocellulose, because the problem with nanocellulose is you can't make it in Finland and ship it to Boston because you're shipping 97% water and it's $1 million a ton. So what I envision is wet lap goes right to product. So you're designing for the product. So incline wire, mid-web machine, and just make healthier molded pulp products, make healthier packaging products. Like, don't dehydrate it until you're ready for it to be dehydrated. Cellophane hornifies it under controlled conditions. Once we cook that pulp at the pulp mill, there's nothing to separate those bonds from coming together like that, right? Because the hemicellulose and the lignin that keeps them separated are gone. So once that hornifies together, it's paper as we know it, but it's not paper as it could be recognized and leveraged. So I think wet lap is the future material basis for packaging, and graphics is distributed, right? Why are we, you should be able to flow artwork through connected nodes and deploy. I feel like there's a missed opportunity there to integrate technology with our current archaic ways of making packaging.
That still doesn't solve my predicament, Kelly. So the predicament is more to do with the technology you're pursuing. So, okay, over time, what we've tried various times is, again, enzymatic cooking, enzymatic bleaching, and we've also tried other stuff. Because what happens in the pulp and paper process, you create a problem, and then you have another plan to solve the problem. How do you create the problem? You create the problem by cooking it with harsh chemicals. Then you have a chemical recovery system that recovers that chemicals, and you cook it again. So it's an endless, cycle that kind of happens. And we've tried other stuff, like we've tried formic acid pulping and acetic acid pulping and explosion pulping, but none of it comes to pass. So how are you designing that so that it really happens at the small scale and effectively?
That's the GreenKey secret. That's what GreenKey does. It can take it, as long as there's cellulose in it, it can separate cellulose from everything else. And the lignin, the hemicellulose, the oils and medicines that are extracted are all in the liquid phase, unadulterated, completely separatable and valorizable. But the cellulose can be everything from current pulp and paper products all the way to nanocellulose with a stop at dissolving grade. So it can continue, because we don't have that material space. We don't have something that is so fibrillated that if you dry it, it hornifies, but is opened up enough that you can now build material science, it becomes a scaffold. You can polymerize PLA on the scaffold of cellulose if you wanted to. We just never had that material because 93% of the world's cellulose comes from the kraft process. So until we just address, I'm not saying the kraft process needs to go away, but I think it's fair to say we won't see another kraft pulp mill built in North America in our lifetime. So what's going to be the replacement? It's that. You have to start turning zero carbon footprint, natural biomass in the region for which you need it. And then brands can start controlling the radius. You can start creating more of a cellular system, but that takes years. But right now, you can solve the material science problem by just looking at the past and it's funny because people in sustainability roles today, like you almost have to be always looking into the future, right? And sometimes we just need to stop and look at the past before we start extrapolating into the future, because the past tells you a lot of what you need to know. And we're seeing a lot of things from the past coming back to vogue. I joke that old is the new. Like our solution to PFAS was a 1966 taffy paper. So we're seeing things coming back that we've known for years, just never had an incentive to do anything with it.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. There's a thought that flashed through my mind, and it's really interesting. I read a lot that Nazi Germany worked a lot on biomass gasification because it didn't have enough oil, so they would find a way to create carbon monoxide and then try and fire that. And again, it's a technology that kind of came back much later, and people are still toying with that, and it's similar to what you're saying. So okay, let's. Of course, I wish all the very best for this whole technology to grow. Where are you at? How close are you to significant commercialization to be able to take the GreenKey technology forward?
So I'm not as involved in the day-to-day. So there's some cool things going on that I'm not sure how much I'm at liberty to say, but they are, seeking, there's concern about the grants that are in place and are they going to stay? So I think just based on that, there's a renewed interest in finding the right strategic partners to keep it moving forward. But again, GreenKey's goal is not to be downstream oriented in valorization, but to enable it by being the one that knows how to separate nature into its bits and pieces. That's really what it is. It's the next step to agriculture is to take the 48% that ends up being the food that we eat. The other 52% is going to turn into the packaging that wraps that food.
Yeah, I have to, when we are off this call, I have to introduce you to some people you love. And it's people, it's amazing. There's a lab I visited in Portugal, and they use a lot of what you were saying to convert into nutraceuticals.
Okay.
So that's that stream as well. Very high value, but taking that molecule and making it effective for nutraceuticals and numerous applications within that space as well. So, and of course, there is not just the nanocrystalline bits, but there's also MFCs that are, again, can be used for so many, and by MFC, I mean microfibrillated cellulose, which is bigger than a nanocellulose, so those are also things that can be used. So I'm going to, again, go back to what you were talking about earlier. There's so much customer branding around this idea of my shirt is made out of bamboo. But again, you and I know what it takes to get alpha celluloses out. And it's even more harmful, when you look at dissolving grade pulp. So I would love for you to address that, since you understand that discipline, this whole idea that it's a viscose fiber. How does that impact, in terms of the impact, in terms of the carbon impact? How do you see that?
I think it's all, cellulose is the most abundant polymer on earth. It's a wonderful material that you can do lots of things chemically, catalytically, and enzymatically. The problem is we just don't start with the right form of it because we go through a craft process. So I think I think cellulose is the future polymer that we build with, but the other ones are important because we know polymers play a role in packaging and other things. So you're not going to not use them. You're just not going to replace 37 million tons in North America alone of plastics every year, virgin plastics in packaging, won't be replaced with PLA. It's going to be replaced with natural materials. But PLA is going to be a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, we know the current processes are not something, like you said, craft processes are not something we can continue with in terms of the amount of harm they cause is also significant. Pivoting towards flexible packaging. So, of course, there is a lot of flexible packaging that we see. How do you see that structure evolving so that it is not just recyclable? Maybe they make it a monolayer and they call it recyclable. That might have its own challenges, but becoming compostable. So say if you were to look at a potato chip bag of the future, how do you see the structure?
It's known that you can make a chip bag that's home compostable, that has all the properties to provide barrier, run on the equipment, costs more. So price is a big, probably the biggest problem with it. But look, let's be honest. The plastics industry doesn't want to see compostable packaging be successful. They would rather have some new seaweed polymer on stage at the plastic shows than a real threat. And I don't mean that anything against, but I'm just saying like there's a purposefulness to it that we just have to take into consideration. So I don't know if the quagmire in California with interpretation of their new law, SB 54, has plastics influence behind it, but it's complex, right? And then we're at this stage where everyone's worried about the future sustainability because administration is drill, baby, drill, deregulation, and just a lot of concern. My point goes back to what I said earlier. That's dust. It's chaotic dust. Don't let it get in your eyes. Let it settle to the ground, because for BlackRock to make a statement like that should tell you that they already know they're setting up to control the transition. And it'll be interesting to see how they do that, because you have to decentralize it if you do it, because you can't centralize biomass valorization.
You inferred to one thing in passing, and that is the whole idea of conversion. So, of course, people have trillions of dollars of assets, the Amcors and the Pactivs of the world who will not just let go of their assets. Tell us more about the complexity when it comes to tolling, and what does that take? And then they have their own challenges. They have to run their machines at a certain speed. They are obviously they have been set up for a certain kind of structure. How do you see that evolving?
They're big, right? Multiple sites, very big sites, do a lot of volume. They're almost, and they have painted themselves into their own predicament, because they don't design packaging, they design for printing presses. And they're so far removed from the customer who needs it, and they have ERP systems that may take the amount of time to confirm an order as somebody else would be to produce it and ship it. So everyone views digital printing as a non-threat because the speed isn't there. And I've heard throughout my career, once digital hits 350 feet a minute, that's what's going to put Flexo out of business. That's not what's going to put Flexo out of business. Increasingly, you're not going to find people to run them. It's a highly trained position. I can go into any town, any quadrant of any city in the country, and I can hire a digital press operator, no problem. And if you start thinking about packaging as being as organic as the food that's being grown locally, and the material science comes just as locally, there's no reason you're not printing on-demand packaging where each impression is uniquely scannable using these tools, all connected to So now those contract manufacturers and co-packers for the large brands can not only see everything transparently in their system through new technologies, they can see the packaging. Right now, packaging is excluded from that because it's still made so archaically, where printing starts first, where printing should be as far downstream as possible so that you can deploy it faster.
If we look at, I'm staying with the conversion process, because one is, of course, the printing and the pouching, and it could be a flow, it could be a stand-up, etc., etc. But there is also that angle of currently they also laminate or they do heat seal coating, etc., etc. So they will not just sit and lie on those assets. And you're right, there could be different lobbying that might happen. How does one transform that industry to actually take in the new reality?
There's going to be most likely some equipment implications. The one that comes to mind most would be like tandem extrusion lamination. It's built to make one thing, a lot of it really fast. I can't go to that machine and do like a single pass run on it, but I think coatings is going to be where a lot of this comes from. You got to, because right now we get so much property from hydrocarbons like moisture barrier. Polypropylene has got an incredible moisture barrier. So the way we build technical solutions from input materials like that makes it in some cases easier, if you want to say. So now we're designing the same end properties, but we're designing it from different materials. So to do that, coating technology. So I just gave a talk at a water-based adhesives talk at the ASC conference, and my message was, look, double down on water-based. It's coming back. Why? Because nature starts with water. Water and nature are synonymous. We're going to need aqueous, bio-based coatings, whether it's barrier, heat seal. You're going to continue to see that. One of the biggest challenges with heat seal, bio-based heat seal coatings, or any heat seal coating, is, again, we're starting with hornified cellulose to make the paper. So we're still curling and cockling and all these things that paper tends to do. A lot of it's because of the paper, right? I think that's no secret. So once we start engineering substrates differently, I think one of the big areas that we're going to, and radiation curable, I think we're going to see that too. UV and E-beam, like from the GreenKey process, the hemicelluloses and the lignins, let me repeat, they're unadulterated. So unadulterated lignin, the implications are not quite nanocellulose, but not far from it. You can make acetaminophen from lignin. You can make the best barrier coatings, and I can enzymatically acrylate all of those things. And I can evolve enzymes to do that even more efficiently. So I think RadCure for inks and coatings and adhesives, I think, has a real bright future because it's the lowest technology from a sustainability perspective, the energy required versus laying down something wet, drying it, VOCs, all that kind of stuff. I think radiation curable has got a bright future too.
Super. And of course, there's a lot of complexity in what you've spoken about. So just to, again, make it easier, lignin is, of course, the substance that creates the bonds between celluloses. And then, in order to manufacture the current paper, we have to remove those bonds and then hydrolyze the paper, just for the listeners who may not know the term lignin. So what is your future vision when it comes to the structure that you see that will have the right moisture barrier? Is it a mix of cellulose and PLA? And, how do you see, do we really have to go to that under 1 water vapor transmission rate, or do you see that as over-engineered? And then what does your future structure look like for that?
I'm not going to give away all my secrets, but I will say that it involves simplifying material science to bond and let go as needed, knowing where it's going to go. So that sounds a little mysterious, but basically there's a real opportunity to simplify packaging considerably. I believe surface print is the way to go. You need to separate functional graphics from graphic decoration, and it allows you to push print downstream. Look, there's a reason Doritos aren't part of the Halloween festivities, because when you buy a bag of Doritos, it may have been filled within the last month. The packaging was probably made 9 months ago. So I think those are real opportunities to rethink supply chain. I think the size of the current flexible packaging manufacturers being, pushing that $1 billion mark is going to hamper their ability to be not only in tune with the market, but I think being able to react to some realities as some of those long-running legacy SKU brands just over time start to decline. You're going to be replacing it. The brand will replace it, but it's not going to be from that one brand that's a $7 billion brand anymore.
More power to you as you go along. And that takes me towards the penultimate question that I always love to hear, which is, if you had a crystal ball and you were gazing at it 5 years hence, how do you see, GreenKey and the other things that you're doing evolving? And what is your vision in the next 5 years?
a lot of ground game build out. Again, scale is not about centralized, it's about deployability. So I don't care if you have a process that can scale to 400 tons. I would say, why would you ever make 400 tons a day in one location? You need to show me that you can put 40 mills in that can do 10 a day. That's the future of scalability. So that's going to start to happen. I'm already seeing it in some aspects of it, but once somebody starts creating a bioeconomy in a region, it will grow.
Superb and succinct. And that takes me to my final question. What does good garbage mean to you?
I love it. I love that question. I was not expecting that at all, but I love it. I'm not saying we stop using the word. That's ridiculous, but we got to start thinking about it differently, just like throwaway, right? So in some ways, I feel like the current administration and their views on deregulation, like it just reinforces what we already know, right? Until they change the RCRA law, which is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, I think 1979, which at that point called waste a state's problem, it's always going to be treated with, whether it's revered as garbage, it's going to be treated as it. So I feel like our opportunity is to show that it's not bad, it's good, it's feedstock. And I feel like one of the biggest levers to do that is blockchain, because what's going to drive capitalism into waste management is making sure that material is what it's supposed to be. So now you can create futures and sell against it, and that will drive capitalism into the space.
And one thing of course, we didn't discuss at all, and I have to discuss it before we go away because you're a fellow podcaster. What prompted that? The Roots to Fruits podcast. What is it about? Let's give a shout out to people who will want to probably access that and learn from you. And why did you get into making that effort?
Roots to Fruits is that culmination from that moment mowing my yard in June of 2001 to now. It's the culmination of it because I finally realized that I wasn't wrong. I just had the wrong lens to see what I was observing. And once I realized that connection, I felt compelled to not only write about it, but to talk about it because it's all connected. Look, we're approaching a system collapse, and we need to realize like if you and I never liked each other, like everybody knew we hated each other, it's that day you're forcing a car together. You realize that all of your indifferences are fake. They dissolve. When crisis hits, hatred dissolves, and the hierarchy of actual needs comes back. And so I'm kind of sharing that. So Roots to Fruits, I'm a deep yoga practitioner and a yoga teacher. So there's a yoga inspiration to it, which is root is your root chakra, which develops at about 10, 12 years old. Everything about you has a lot to do with that person. And then the next is sacral. So you can look at industry that way. You're selfish when you're 10 years old, right? You all you know is yourself and your immediate family. So your sense of security, how grounded you are as a person, it all gets baked in. Those roots form there. Then you start getting curious about other people in the world, sexually, other opposite sex, creativity. Like you start to branch out of those roots, and you spend a good part of your time building the trunk of your tree. Well, you don't build a tree if you don't have strong roots. You become a vine. But the real is that third eye pineal gland, that third eye energy, that's where the real fruit, that's where that bonding energy comes from. That desire to be a part of something greater than yourself really manifests in that. But you have a lot of opposite forces. So I use the chakra spectrum to look at individuals, teams, organizations, entire industries. You can look at it through that lens tied to physics, E equals MC squared. All matter is both mass and energy. So at any given moment, your internal dichotomic valves of your emotions could shift you towards mass or enlighten you towards energy. You can apply that same filter. So Roots to Fruits really is just the embodiment of mass and energy at the scale that I tend to weave into every conversation that I have. So that's where the name came from. And in it, it's going to be about applying that logic to the real world, but it's always going to be based on my area of sustainability, packaging, material science will always be baked into it.
And what is the kind of people who you are wanting to have and the conversations that you're going to have there?
My target demographic for the book are not my network. I want them to get it, but my network, people in the packaging industry and material science, some of you are in it, but my demographic is defined as really women between 30 and 55, because I feel like there's so much soft bonding energy there. There's this real deep desire to save the planet and to make the world a more nutritious place. There's just so much energy there that I feel like this book and this message helps them. And my second is college students or recent graduates. I spend a lot of time with them, speaking to them. And I got to say, for someone who probably grew up not around the meal ritual and our love of food at home because of sports and just the craziness of our lives, they still carry with them this genuine, deep desire to save the world. And they don't know how. Then I want to help give them some ideas on how to do that.
Amazing. There is so much to learn from what you're doing now and your whole life journey. And of course, this has been a masterclass for me on various aspects, right from petroleum to flexibles to pulping. And I'm sure lots of people who listen to this episode will definitely learn from those. And I know we've just scratched the surface. There is so much underneath every topic that we actually tried to get into. So thank you so much, Kelly, for the work you're doing, for taking the time to talk to us. And, I wish you all the very best to transform this world into a better place. Thank you so much for the work.
And as soon as we're ready, we're going to have you on my show.
I'm not a woman, nor am I a student, but would love to be there.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Good Garbage Podcast. Follow us on social media to never miss an episode. Links are in the description below. I'm your host, Ved Krishna. See you next time.